Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the easiest way to create a beautiful website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features an elegant interface, beautiful templates, and incredible 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com and enter offer code TRUEMURDER at checkout to get 10% off. Squarespace. Build it beautiful. In Pretty Little Killers, journalist Daleen Berry and investigator Geoffrey Fuller expand upon their New York Times bestselling ebook, The Savage Murder of Skylar Neese, to give you even more information behind one of the most horrific and shocking murders of our time. Including over 100 pages of new material, Pretty Little Killers shares the latest theories and answers the questions that have left many people baffled. After killer Sheila Eddie pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, and Rachel Shoaf was sentenced to 30 years for second-degree murder, family, friends, investigators, and other key sources revealed the facts you would have learned if the case had gone to trial. Including specific details drawn from Rachel's confession, Pretty Little Killers looks at the crime through the eyes of the victim and killers, providing intimate testimony from the pages of Rachel's personal journal, Skylar's diary, and school papers and court records. Berry and Fuller examine all this, including previously unreported details about Rachel and Sheila's rumored lesbian relationship, and explain why more than one investigator believes Skylar's murder was a thrill kill. Most important, Pretty Little Killers provides a satisfying answer to Skylar's final question, why? Little Killers is the book that we're featuring this evening, The Truth Behind the Savage Murder of Skylar Neese, with my special guest, journalist and author, Daleen Berry. And once again, audience, I apologize. I had trying to walk Daleen Berry through the process of connecting through Skype. I thought we had addressed the problem in the last few minutes, and then apparently not. Again, a few minutes to have her possibly, and again, it's my fault for this, and I apologize. And if I could, I'm going to have to contact Blog Talk Radio and find out how to delete this episode so that people don't have to suffer through this insufferable excuses for not having everything together that I need to have together to have this show and have these fine guests come on via Skype or via any method that they'd like. So we'll just give it a few minutes. This is Daleen Berry, Pretty Little Killers, juvenile killers, so very disturbing to most people, a phenomena that's growing, not rather than dissipating in America. See more and more of this as kids mature, and also startling evidence thanks to social media, and social media being a real participant really and intimately involved in these crimes, and later providing crucial evidence at trial, incriminating evidence, as most people their lives are inextricably involved with social media, tweeting, Facebook, etc., and connecting. So I apologize. I Daleen, probably having some real problems here, know what to do. Really, we just suffer through a couple more minutes, and then I will definitely reschedule this episode if she is not so angry about not being frustrated and spending this much time just to get on this show, spending her valuable time. She's had some beyond bad luck in the last few weeks, so she's been very, very gracious, and I appreciate her taking the time, her valuable, busy time to come on and talk about this incredible crime and her wonderful book, Pretty Little Killers, The Truth Behind the Savage Murder of Skylar Neese. And there's quite a few things to discuss in this book as well. Being in Canada, very, very surprising when I see the differences in states. Here we go, Daleen Berry. Welcome to the program, Dan. Daleen Berry. Hi. Thank you very much. The audience only have to suffer through a few minutes of my seems routine excuses for guests not coming on. So I apologize. We've introduced your book, and so
Great.
let me first ask the question that's one of my routine questions. Without giving anything away, how did you come to want to write this book, or how did you come to be the person that wrote Pretty Little Killers?
Well, it happened in the town where I live, and another writer and I got together and decided it was just a fascinating case. It wasn't your run-of-the-mill teenage runaway or teenage girl gets picked up by an internet predator case.
Now,
is that giving too much away?
No, not at all, not at all. Now, at what point did you know about this story? Again, you say it was in your town, so tell us exactly at the point that you became aware of this story, and then how long after before you officially decided, or when was it that you officially decided, I'm going to write about this?
I became aware of it almost immediately when they started announcing that Skylar Neese was missing. Like most people in the community, Morgantown is a small area, and so people generally look out for each other, and that's what we did. But it wasn't until a year later when it became apparent that there was a lot more to the case than just a runaway that I got involved in it, and my co-author got involved in it.
Now, Skylar Neese was born in 1996, so tell us about Skylar Neese and her parents, and tell us about who she was, where was she from, and tell us a little bit more about Morgantown and in relation to the state capital. We'll say, where is this? Tell us geographically where this is. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Morgantown is in north-central West Virginia, which is located about 90 minutes south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it is about 2.5 hours north of Charleston, which is the state capital. We're almost in the center of the state, just a little bit north of it. And Skylar and her parents came from a lower socioeconomic level, you might say. They had lived in the Cheat Lake area for a while, which is one of the outskirts of Morgantown. And then they moved across to Star City, which is closer to Morgantown. It's kind of like a suburb, but it's closer than Cheat Lake. It's only about 5 to 10 minutes from downtown Morgantown. Her father works at Walmart, and her mother works at Ruby Memorial Hospital. Skylar was an honor student who pretty much bounced and bopped along everywhere she went. She always had a smile on her face from what her peers said and her family. And she was well-liked by just about everybody. And she was an honor student who wanted to go to college to become a defense attorney.
Was the family religious at all, and was Skylar religious at all?
It's interesting. The family, her parents were not. They did not go to church, and they don't profess to be religious. However, her Aunt Carol was very religious and took Skylar to church with her. What we learned during the interview with Carol was she would share, Bible passages or Bible stories with Skylar as she was growing up. And so I think it's because of Carol's influence that Skylar had a religious bent.
Now let's introduce her friend Sheila, and tell us who Sheila is. And for our audience, they meet when Skylar is 7 years old in 2003 in the second grade, and they meet at a little community and youth center. So tell us who Sheila is and a little bit about her life, and tell us a little bit about Sheila.
Sheila Eddie came from an outlying area about 30 minutes away from Morgantown in a little town called Blacksville. And Blacksville is very rural. She was the child of parents that divorced pretty early on, Greg and Tara Eddy. And one of the very big events in her life was her father's accident. He was in a motor vehicle accident and sustained a traumatic brain injury, which left him to some extent disabled. And then later on, he and her mother divorced. So she grew up essentially in a single parent family. She saw both parents, but she was living with her mom primarily. And one of the major events after that it seemed to impact her life greatly was her mother's relationship and subsequent engagement to Jim Clendenin, and that seemed to be a very, for Sheila at least, seemed to be a very negative thing that happened in her life, because her mother, had a new love interest, and it kind of took her away from Sheila to some extent.
Wasn't there some initial, on Sheila's part, sort of enjoyment of the financial security and some of the financial perks that the new husband could provide?
That's actually what family members and friends said about her relationship with her stepfather, and before he became her stepfather, was that she didn't really care for the relationship, but she liked the monetary and material benefits it could bring her.
She actually kind of went up the level of sort of the ladder in terms of economics, socioeconomics, with her father or her stepfather having more financial means, didn't she?
She did, quite a bit, actually.
Now, they had a friendship starting in the second grade, and so they would do things in school and then outside of school as well. And what was the relationship between the parents of Skylar and Sheila? How did they, what extent did their friendship extend to?
Well, it's interesting because when they met, it was a summer program, and they gradually, over the few years after that, they became closer and closer. And Sheila's mom, Tara, seemed to be the primary source of transportation for Skylar, possibly because she had, it was easier for her to get, she worked in town, she worked in Morgantown, so she could pick Skylar up from town and take her out to their place. And for a long time, Skylar would visit them at their home in Blacksville. Weekends, in the summertime, she was out there a lot during the weekdays, according to the neighbors in Blacksville.
Now, in terms of the characters, kids growing up, some women, girls, boys, men, mature at different rates. In terms of experience, we'll say sexual experimentation, or say the classic things, drug use or alcohol use. Who is more, we'll say, inclined to be the rebel or rebellious, Skylar or Rachel? And tell us just a little bit more about their characters in comparison. Skylar and Sheila, pardon me.
I would have to say that it would be Sheila by far. Skylar did not seem to be a rebel type. What was very interesting about the dynamic she had with her parents was she didn't really hide anything she did. She pretty much was open about what she did, and I think because of that, she had a closer bond with her parents. And she knew what was right and wrong, and she knew she was going to get in trouble if she did something wrong, but she also knew that her parents weren't going to overreact like a lot of parents do. Sheila, on the other hand, seemed to have a mother who let her pretty much do whatever she wanted, and there weren't very many rules, it didn't seem like. It seemed like they were more friends than mother and daughter. And again, her father wasn't in the picture as much, and of course with a traumatic brain injury, it sounded like, based on the information I could gather, that he didn't make many decisions when it came to her behavior or her discipline.
Now, is Skylar and Sheila in any kind of serious disciplinary problems at school or with the law in, say, all of their high school, we'll say, or up to high school, up to 2010? Was there any incidents whatsoever?
No, and that's the very interesting part of the story, is that there had not been any noticeable behavior problems, and what the teachers said and the students at Blacksville who grew up with Sheila was that she seemed a very happy kid who got along with people. She seemed a little bit, I think, probably, I'm trying to think of the exact word, maybe sketchy down the road, but certainly not sketchy when she was in elementary and junior high. She was maybe not as upright as Skylar was, but the kids liked her. She didn't have any behavioral problems, and she didn't have any relationship problems per se when it came to other students at Blacksville, for the most part.
Now, Skylar and Rachel meet at UHS. So tell us about Skylar and Rachel, and tell us a little bit about Rachel Shoaf. Well, up until Rachel Shoaf's entry into the friendship and when it became a trio, they were freshmen at that time. But up until that point, from the age of 7 or 8 until 9th grade, Sheila and Skylar had been, they had a friendship that was inseparable. It was unbreakable. It was just the two of them for the most part. Occasionally they had other girls that would enter that. But when Rachel came along in 9th grade, she seemed to live on the edge to some extent the way Sheila did, and so very fast that relationship between Sheila and Rachel escalated, and then Skylar found herself on the outside looking in, which was pretty painful for her. But this is a slow process, and there are incidents that happen. So what is there is an incident in 2011 at school where Rachel and Sheila are talking about disposing of a body, discussing this. Tell us about this. This is an incredible story and is important later on as well. It is, and just to kind of finish answering your previous question, whereas Sheila was more into boys, she was pretty boy crazy, and she also liked to smoke marijuana. She made that known through her tweets. Rachel was more a very talented musician, actress, singer, and she had a goal of going to Broadway. All three girls were very academic in terms of succeeding in high school, but at that time Sheila and Rachel ended up in the same biology class, and in the fall of that year, 2011, they were overheard by 3 other students that we know of asking how you dispose of a body, and Sheila apparently used Skylar's name. Rachel tried to shush her. The one student that actually responded made a comment thinking that it was just a joke, saying, "Watch that show Breaking Bad. They have stuff like that on there." And he really didn't think that they meant it. And so because of that, nobody really knew to report it. Tell us of Rachel's home situation and what her relationship was with her parents.
Rachel also came from a broken home. Her parents divorced when she was pretty young. And she didn't have a really great relationship with her mother. There seemed to be a lot of fighting between the two of them. There was definitely a lot of anger on Rachel's part towards her mother. She made it clear to many of her friends at University High School that she wanted to live with her father and that she wasn't happy living with her mother. So that generally seems to be the family dynamics up until the time Skylar was killed.
Now tell us about the first real major incidents. There is a fight that breaks out at the Hollywood Theater. That's in March. Now tell us how they get to this point, and is there any indication before that? Again, tweeting, and as I mentioned to the audience while we're trying to connect, it was that tweeting, the Twitter world, and Facebook itself and social media plays an incredible role in this case, in the crime itself, and then in the prosecution later, and in your book in terms of revealing all kinds of information. So tell us about the climate of this very important connecting through social media before we talk about the fist fight at the Hollywood Theater.
Well, social media did play a very large role in the case because basically, if you look back at their tweets, you could see a very disturbing pattern of internal fighting that was going on between the three girls, but especially between Skylar and Sheila. And you could also see signs that there was kind of a volleying or jockeying for position within the friendship, in large part from Skylar, trying to become closer to Rachel. At times she seemed very angry and hateful towards Sheila, and then it was the same way with Sheila toward Skylar, and also Sheila, making a play for Rachel in terms of being one-upping Skylar for Rachel's friendship. So that was the dynamics of the tweets, and they were pretty disturbing because when you look back at those, you can see that there was clearly something going on that should have, caused people to be alert to there being some serious problems between the three girls.
Now, you talk about some of the people that were there right from the very beginning. You introduce a character named Daniel that's very important to the story. So tell us about Daniel and his relationship to Skylar.
Daniel Hovatter was one of a few very close friends of Skylar from when she was little. She had, I want to say, three very close friends before she met Sheila, Daniel, Morgan, and Hayden. And Daniel, she became friends with him, and her father would go over to Daniel's house and do repairs, and they would play board games, and they just were very close. In fact, he was the only boy that Skylar had a close relationship with throughout school. And Daniel became a pivotal figure in all this because he knew the dynamics of the relationship between the three girls so well that he suspected some foul play early on because he knew that wherever Skylar had gone, either Sheila or Rachel or both of them had to know where she was. And so he became a very important player in the investigation because he was responsible for basically harassing Rachel Shoaf until she told what she knew.
You talk about him understanding the dynamic between the three girls, knowing them intimately, and especially knowing Skylar, but knowing, like you say, the three girls. I alluded to it, or we alluded to it in the synopsis of the book. What was their sexual preference? Was there anything to this lesbian rumor? And what was again, they're young, what was their level of promiscuity, if that was even the case, between those three? What was the difference?
Well, it was very, very different between the three girls. First of all, there's no indication whatsoever that Skylar had even had a sexual experience in terms of, intercourse with a boy or any type of sexual activity with a girl. And these kissing pictures between the girls seemed to be the limit of what Skylar's activity was. But that wasn't the case with Sheila and Rachel. Sheila was very promiscuous. It seems like she began being promiscuous in the 9th grade, right before the 9th grade, right before she moved from Blacksville. She had a relationship with a guy, Dylan Conaway, who, he mentioned that in an interview he did, so that's public knowledge. And then after that, she would have, basically hook up with guys, one-night stands, if you will, and she would go to school the next day and regale her circle of friends with her experiences. Rachel, on the other hand, had a pretty steady boyfriend, Mackenzie Boggs, and she, unbeknownst to people, also had a sexual relationship with Sheila.
Interesting. Now, you talked about Derek Conaway. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say the fight in Hollywood Theater, which broke out, actually was precipitated because Skylar thought that Sheila was texting Rachel, and she was jealous, and she wanted Sheila to show her who she was talking to on her cell phone, and Sheila refused. It turned out that she wasn't texting Rachel, but that fight got pretty hot and heavy really fast, and it ended up with Sheila and Skylar running from the theater, and their friend Shania Ammons following them out. But it came to blows. They came to blows inside the theater, and it was basically over Skylar's jealousy that Sheila was being closer to Rachel than she was to her.
To demonstrate the importance of this fight, how customary or typical was it for either one of these girls to get in a fist fight with anyone?
Not at all. To my knowledge, we haven't heard about any other fights that Sheila was in. Skylar started becoming angry during the last year of her life, according to her parents, and started acting out a little bit at home with her anger issues. But beyond that, there was no knowledge of that.
Now, this fight is in late March at the Hollywood Theater. For April and May of that year following this, what is the relationship like? How do Sheila and Skylar behave towards each other after this fight, and how is it regarded by Rachel? Tell us a little bit about how they all felt about this, and how did they proceed with trying to repair their friendship, or how did it proceed afterwards?
Well, it didn't seem to get much better. I mean, ideally, they seemed to pretend, Rachel and Sheila, that is, seemed to pretend like it got better, but it really didn't. And so they were plotting behind scenes with their level of intimacy, whatever they had going on behind scenes, and Skylar was, for the most part, unaware of that because they were keeping it from her, but they also were acting out on Twitter, and that seemed to be taking a more predominant course in the relationship in the public's eye when you look back at the tweets.
Was there a clear victor in the fist fight? Did someone really get the best of the other person? Was there any humiliation or degradation involved in that fight? Was there any serious injury?
No serious injury, but it does seem like Skylar was more physical than Sheila was, and Sheila was definitely seemed to be humiliated based on the eyewitness account that we got.
Now, in June, there's another major incident at the beach, or they're going to go to the beach, and then they have this huge argument. What is that huge argument about, or is that just an extension of this fight? Tell us if there was some source of this huge argument?
We don't have a definitive answer for that, Dan, unfortunately, but the best guess that we've come up with is that at some point Sheila may have tried to involve or engage Skylar in a sexual relationship, maybe made a pass at her at the beach, because if she could then sway Skylar, there would be no reason for Skylar to hold anything over her. Not that she was, but the perception that she was holding something over them would be removed, and they would feel safe. She and Rachel would feel safe in their relationship. That's the best guess we have, because according to law enforcement, according to Sheila's mother, who was on the trip, they don't know what it was about.
Do you think there's some merit to this, the theory? I guess we're getting a little bit ahead, but in terms of the this exposing of that Skylar, was there really something to that she had something on Rachel and Sheila, and was it connected around misunderstanding, connected to the sexual relationship they had?
It seems highly likely. If you look at the tweets, Skylar's tweets, there's two tweets. One that happens in late August or early September of 2011, right before the incident in the biology class about disposing of a body. And Skylar says something about telling the whole school what she knows. So that could be perceived as a threat. The other thing she says, and Jessica Colbank, who started out as the primary investigator before the FBI and the state police got involved, she said the tweet that Skylar put out to the world not long before she was killed, I think it was within the week time before she was killed, and she said, "Just know I know," and that was after she came back from the beach, indicated that she was basically warning them that she knew what was going on.
Interesting. Now, we're talking about June 9th. You say that there was some activity on Twitter, and there may have been an argument on June 9th. Tell us a little bit about that. What, based on police reports, you say?
Well, Rachel came back from church camp, and that evening she and Sheila met in the University High School parking lot, where they were overheard speaking in raised voices in anger, and a male student asked them if they were fighting about him, and they replied that they were angry over something Skylar had put on her Twitter. And that's the tweet that Skylar put on there, "Just know I know," and she had called them out and using some foul language, and that was when they decided that they would set the date and kill her in July.
Now, you talk about Skylar and her relationship. She's very close. She's very honest with her parents, but there are things that her parents don't know, like the footstool that she uses to sneak out. So tell us a little bit about this sneaking out before we talk about July 6th.
Yeah, now that was the one thing that her parents, they knew before, but they were not aware she was doing it as recently as she was. And I think that's because Skylar was trying to figure out for herself whether she wanted to be more like Sheila or whether she wanted to walk on the safe side, which is what she'd always done until that point. And so I think she was torn between the excitement that she got from sneaking out at night to be with the other two girls. And so she snuck out that night, and, that ended up going with them under false premises based on them telling her that they were going to go party when, in fact, they had planned to kill her.
Now, this is July 6th, and her parents are, unbeknownst to her parents, they believe she's in her bedroom. So tell us what happens the next day? When does Dave, her father, find out? When does everything change?
That's got to be the worst part of the story in terms of Dave and Mary's knowledge and what happened, because he came home from work, and the way the family worked, they had one vehicle that they shared, and so he was going to have Skylar take him back to work, and then she would have the car to go to work. And when he knocked on her bedroom door, she didn't answer, and then when he tried to open it, it wouldn't open, and he found that he couldn't get it open, so he couldn't he couldn't wake her, he thought. And that's when he grabbed a coat hanger and opened it, and her bed hadn't been slept in. He called her mother at work, and Mary said, well, she's probably just gone shopping with some girls, her friends, and he immediately suspected something was wrong, and that's when he went into the bedroom again and realized that her window was up a crack, and he went outside and saw the stool behind the house where she'd hidden it, and then he knew that she'd snuck out and not come back, so he got very worried really fast.
And what's the next thing he did do?
He called Mary, and she said she was coming home from work, and when she got home from work, they were just about ready to call 911 when somebody from Wendy's, where Skylar worked, called and wanted to know why she hadn't shown up for work. And when Mary hung up the phone, that's when they called 911 to report her missing.
And what was the police response to the 911 call and their assertion that she was missing and this was not typical and that it would be urgent? What was their police reaction? What did they say to Mary and Dave?
Well, the police reaction was much different than what the initial media report said. They came out, they canvassed the area with them, they looked at surveillance video from the apartment building, and they wrote up a report. They interviewed Sheila, and because Sheila and her mom came over at Mary's request and watched the surveillance video of Skylar getting into this car in a grainy video, and when everybody asked Sheila if she knew whose car that was, she said no. So they took her at face value, and obviously not believing that a pretty sweet-faced 16-year-old girl could be involved in Skylar's disappearance. And then the unfortunate thing was that the parents wanted an Amber Alert issued, which in the state of West Virginia, that has to go through the state police headquarters, which is in Charleston, the capital. So Star City Police, where the investigation began, made the call a couple of times to Charleston after entering Skylar's information about her height and weight and all that physical data into the crime database, so that if she was found anywhere, people would know, that she was a missing teenager. But they made the request, and state police denied it because they said she didn't seem to be in danger. She had left willingly with someone she knew, so they would not issue the Amber Alert, and that was a big problem for her parents, as I'm sure you can understand.
So there are friends that Dave and Mary know of. So the very first friend that they did call Dave was Sheila. So what did Sheila say about seeing Skylar and anything else about the incident to Dave?
Well, that was what was so confusing, Dan. She said that at first she said when they called Sheila, at first she denied seeing Skylar, and then she called back and said, I have to tell you the truth. We snuck out, and we were gone for about 30 minutes, and she was back home, and that's how they figured that she had left with someone else, or maybe even been abducted by someone else before she made it back into her bedroom window. But, of course, what they didn't know at that time was that Sheila was lying about the timeline of events, and that she and Rachel had picked Skylar up later.
Well, this is one of the more fascinating aspects of this, and I don't want to pick on police, but this is a Keystone Cop moment, if there ever was one, I think, especially when you get used to watching CSI. on television. So I know it's unrealistic to expect perfection. But Sheila said that her and Rachel picked up Skylar at 11 and then drove around just nowhere specific and then dropped her back off. So police, in this day of video, there are video cameras in most places. What do the police do, and what do they see with the tape itself and with the timeline that Sheila has put forth?
Well, initially, the belief was that the police didn't recognize the car. But when I interviewed Jessica Colbank, she said, I suspected it was Sheila's car, but we didn't have any evidence. And there's still a question in my mind, and I think most of the public would agree, that why didn't they just take the car and search it? Well, the police said they didn't have probable cause, but you've got a missing teenager, so that doesn't altogether make sense. But in the end, I will have to say that in the end, I don't think that you would have had the confession from Rachel and the guilty plea later on from Sheila, which basically eliminated the need for a trial and a slam dunk ultimately at the end. But it was very confusing to the public for many months because the police did not reveal the knowledge of what they had behind the scenes and what they suspected. Although I also believe that at some level psychologically they did not want to believe that either of those girls could have done anything to Skylar. They basically said as much during the interviews.
That's what I got from this as well, is that they were hoodwinked just like almost everyone else initially, and maybe that's not the way they should have thought, but in sort of the reverse of the way police typically think, they just didn't imagine that these little girls, these young girls, sweet girls, were capable of something like this. So in that vein, let's talk a little bit more about, I think, the most important part of this case and a real eureka moment for police much later. So let's not give it away, but let's talk about this 11 o'clock to 11:45 and dropping Skylar off and what the police saw in terms of a car and persons in that car dropping someone off at a certain time and what they didn't notice at that time. Again, we'll answer that first part of the question so that we can, it's incredible what they find out later.
Well, if I understand the question, Dan, what they saw in the video was grainy footage of a car that looked like it. I don't even know if you could tell the color. If you could, maybe a gray car, but it was parked away from the apartment building, and you could see Skylar enter the screen at the corner and kind of walk pretty fast with a purse or a backpack, I forget what she had with her at that night, and she opened the door of the back seat of the vehicle and got in, and then the car drives away. Is that what you were asking about?
Sure, and we'll get the audience, because I've dwelled on this, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, what happens later with police. Remarkably, they understand this and make a eureka moment. So at this time, with police not suspecting these girls, again, the Twitter world, or Twitter's, again, I don't know, Twitter world, I guess, and Facebook and social media light up with all of the friends, all these young people utilizing this, communicating their rumors. There are people that are instigators. There are people that seem to have better rumors than other people or more persistent. So tell us about some of these people and some of the sites, and tell us a little bit about some of the information that was circulating, true and rumored information on social media.
Well, the teenagers or the teenage world, the university high students, and also the Blacksville students, which the high school there is Clay Battelle, and that's where Sheila had gone until she transferred to UHF when she became a freshman. Those two high schools the students there were tweeting either one of two things. They were tweeting either tell us what you know, or, we know you're involved, or, where's Skylar, what happened to her. There was a lot of, you could see a lot of emotional tension, both on Facebook and Twitter from the teenagers. They were, first of all, heartbroken that one of their own had gone missing, heartbroken for the nieces, heartbroken actually for, Sheila and Rachel because their best friend was missing. And then over time, it kind of grew into a crescendo where the students were saying, you girls know something, basically. And I think a lot of that came from Daniel Hovatter putting forth the premise that they had to be involved.
It's interesting the role that Jennifer Woodall has on Jennifer Woodall Hunt that has on Facebook, and some of the things that she does there's some truth to some of the things, but she's also creates a lot of pressure on Dave and Mary by circulating harmful and damaging rumors and untruths on some of her posts as well. Isn't that true?
Yeah. That had to be, I can't even imagine what they went through. One of the most disturbing ones to me was that she'd been in contact with Skylar, and Skylar was just hiding from her parents. She'd gotten pregnant and didn't want her dad to know. Her mom knew, but her father, she didn't want him to know. And she was coming home. She was safe. That was just really disturbing to me, to think of what they must have gone through when they saw things like that.
There was also vicious rumors about, in reality, she probably smoked pot occasionally. There's no real evidence of much more than that. And then there was vicious rumors rumors about regarding drugs and her drug use.
Yeah, there was, but Skylar pretty much. I think that she probably experimented with some other drugs from some of the accounts that I got during interviews. But for the most part, she used marijuana, and it's interesting because Daniel Hovatter said that she used marijuana to help her sleep because she had a hard time getting to sleep at night.
Now, it's also interesting, too, is that coincidentally, there's a bank robbery in this small town around the same time, and police believe, wrongfully, of course, that there's some connection. And there's a good reason why there's connection. We talked about Sheila's having a relationship at some point, some type of relationship with a Derek Conaway. So tell us about
Dylan.
Why police, Dylan, his brother. So tell us about this bank robbery and this initial misunderstanding that the police thought there was a connection.
Well, what happened was the state police were investigating the bank robberies, and they had gotten some information that there was some Blackville characters involved, and so they decided to check out some known criminal elements and went canvassing houses, and one of the houses they went to was the Conaway house. And when they got there, they saw Dylan's older brother, Derek. He came from around the back of the house where he had been digging with a shovel, and he had the shovel in his hand, and they said specifically that when they joked with him about burying a body, you could basically see his heart thumping in his chest. He didn't have a shirt on, and he seemed to be very disturbed at that comment. So they suspected that he perhaps had something to do with Skylar's disappearance.
We're going to use this as a pause just for our sponsor of this episode. The sponsor of this episode is Squarespace. And I don't know if you happened to see the recent Super Bowl, and it was a really cool Squarespace Super Bowl ad with the dude, a.k.a. Jeff Bridges, who has partnered with Squarespace to bring his unique project to life. Jeff and his friends have created an album of soothing and relaxing sounds, guided meditations, and stories designed to lull you to sleep. Check out www.dreamingwithjeff.com. Squarespace, simple, powerful, beautiful. Squarespace offers 24/7 support via live chat and email, only $8 a month, and you get a free domain if you buy Squarespace for the year. Squarespace has a responsive design. Your website scales to look good on any device. the commerce end, every website comes with a free online store. Cover Pages is a feature that allows you to set up a beautiful one-page presence in minutes. Start a trial with no credit card required. And when you do sign up for Squarespace, make sure to use the offer code TrueMurder to get yourself 10% off your first purchase. We want to thank Squarespace for support of this episode of True Murder. Squarespace, build it beautiful. As we were talking about the bank robbery connections, so how does it proceed with the FBI? You talk about Officer Ronnie Gaskins and Spurlock from the FBI. Tell us about their involvement and how they proceed with the investigation from here at this point.
Well, Star City, where Skylar disappeared from, is a very, very small area geographically. And unfortunately, once the car drove outside of that boundary, then it becomes the jurisdiction of either the county or the state police, depending on, what they decide and who's going to take it over. So what happened ultimately was one of the superiors in the state police contacted Ronnie Gaskins and Chris Berry and said, can you all check out these robberies? And while they were doing that, they started talking about Skylar's disappearance. And this was after they met Derek Conaway that day, who, of course, had nothing to do with her disappearance, but they didn't know that at the time. And they started talking, and then Mary Neese makes a call to state police and asks them if they'll get involved, and then they get a call from their superior about going over to see what they can find out from her. So they get involved by going to the Neese's house and checking Skylar's bedroom, at which point they see her diary, and they really are taken aback by what they read in the diary in terms of the type of person she was. They didn't feel like she was the type of teenager who would just deliberately disappear and leave her parents to anguish wondering where she was. So that's how they came to be involved. The FBI got involved. Morgan Spurlock, in particular, got involved because there had been a little girl, 3-4 years old. She was in Weston, which is about an hour and a half from Morgantown. They still haven't found her, but they thought maybe when Skylar came up missing that there was perhaps a serial predator targeting female underage kids, and so that's how the FBI got involved, that and the bank robbery.
Now, you spoke of the diary. When the FBI examined it, was there any reference to the stormy relationship between Rachel, Sheila, and herself? And if so, what did she say?
There was, to some extent. She didn't talk much about it, though. The main thing she talked about, the one incident that she mentioned was she did mention a few things, but she doesn't go into it in very much detail. She mentions things like Sheila upset her by being closer to Rachel and ignoring her and hurting her feelings, things like that. She doesn't really go into much detail in the diary. She doesn't really seem to be laying her heart out in her diary, for instance, like I would if I was hurt over something. I would go into every single detail and recount it just so I could have a clear memory of what happened, but Skylar didn't seem to do that. She just kind of spoke in general terms.
Now, the chatter on social media, again, we talked about its negative effect on Mary and Dave, and all the parents were aware of the rumors. This is a small town. What did the parents do, Mary and David? What did they do with this information at some point? What did they glean anything from it? Or were they trying to get? What was their reaction with that information, and what was their reaction with the police's response or lack of response in their mind, in their estimation?
Well, they were pretty upset early on because the police did not reveal what they knew. The police oftentimes will withhold information because
Sure.
they feel that if it can get out, then it's going to hurt the investigation, which of course can happen. So, rightfully so, they did that. But Mary and Dave were pretty good at following what they saw on Twitter. They even had some friends with their accounts following the teenagers and trying to decipher, or even beyond deciphering, egging or prodding at Sheila and Rachel to get them to maybe say what they knew. And Mary especially followed the social media activity really close.
What was the relationship like between Tara and Mary and the parents of these girls? What was going on in the dynamic between the parents?
Well, Tara and Mary and Dave knew each other fairly well, but Mary and Dave didn't know Patricia Shoaf hardly at all. I think they had barely met her. But the relationship between Tara and Mary and Dave went back several years because their daughters had been friends since they were 7 or 8. But they didn't really, for the most part, interact much socially. I think a few times they may have gotten together and done something, but for the most part they didn't, because everybody was working, and they just probably didn't have the time or the money to do that.
Tell us what the breakthrough was, again, getting back to what the police have this eureka moment where they're reviewing, scratching their heads, frustrated. They review the videotape again of the outside of Skylar's home. Tell us what that eureka moment is and what they discovered.
Well, they had spent days practically going over car details. They would look at the side mirrors. They would look at the grill. They would look at every single detail of a vehicle they could to try to determine what make and model of the car in the video was. They got a big screen and they labored over that for days practically. And finally, as Chris Berry said, when the coffee didn't even taste good anymore, putting countless hours overtime into looking through the video and looking at other cars, they went home, called it a day, and it was really late that night. And they were each in their respective homes, and probably about the same time they realized that it was Sheila's car, because nothing else made sense. That was the only thing that made sense to them. And that was the eureka moment for the state police.
The other part of it is that they realized that while they had video of the car dropping Skylar off, they only had half of the video, they realized. They realized they only had half of the video, which hence would
correct.
be the question to what.
Yeah, and
so explain that to us.
Well, they actually, yes, you're right, they did. And I forget that sometimes because for so long the public didn't know that, and neither did we. But they didn't see a car. They didn't see Sheila's car Sheila said that she got back roughly, 15, 30 minutes before Skylar supposedly was seen leaving in this second car that she told everybody must have picked Skylar up. And so what they realized was they never saw Sheila's car pick Skylar up. They never saw Sheila's car bring her back. And so they determined that the only car, it was Sheila's car, because that was the only car in the video. There was no other car when you went behind that moment in time, and when you went forward in the video, Sheila's car was the only one, and that's why it had to have been hers.
It's interesting that other people thought it was suspicious that they would have went driving for 30 or 45 minutes, dropped her off before midnight, and then she would have hung around either outside or back in her room again for 45 minutes, according to the timeline, to be picked up by somebody else and then disappear from there with association with some other person, And again, with no evidence of anything and no video of that as well. So that was very interesting. Now, given that the police have this eureka moment, they have this, again, this very incriminating evidence, and they got a couple people that they thought were just recently very, very innocent. How do they proceed with Sheila and Rachel? And tell us about the polygraph examinations that they want for these women.
Well, they basically harassed them. They interrogated them repeatedly. They kept calling them to their office, and they would question them. And they finally set up the polygraphs. And the very interesting part of the polygraph events was that Rachel leapt from her father's car practically as it was moving and ran off and ended up with Sheila's mother, who then kept her effectively from going and having her polygraph. So Sheila failed her polygraph. Rachel ended up, I think she took one later on. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she took one later on. But ultimately, she broke down and confessed.
Now, before this confession, it's interesting. So let's go just back a little bit here, because there's Rachel goes away, and then there is Sheila to be questioned, and so something happens without one of the girls, unbeknownst to one of the girls. Something is happening. Someone is talking. So tell us about this incident and what happens while one is away.
Are you referring to Rachel being hospitalized?
Yes.
Okay. So Rachel is, she's been keeping this secret inside of her, and it's been literally driving her crazy from all accounts. And over the Christmas break, after she gets back from celebrating the holidays with her family, she has a breakdown of sorts and is taken away by her parents to a psychiatric hospital where she's committed. And that is the first time since Skylar disappeared that she and Sheila were separated. And they were separated for about a 5-day period. And when she gets out, because she had missed her appointment, her next interview with the police for her polygraph, they said, bring her straight here, do not take her home. And that's what her parents did. The police wanted that because they felt like for a 5-day period she had not had any access to Sheila and vice versa, so they felt like it would possibly be a really good time to get her to maybe break and tell what she knew.
Right. So tell us about the interview itself and how police proceed in that interview. And, of course, you already mentioned it as a confession. So how do they get it? They always strategize before they go into that room, no matter what they think they know, because without that confession, things get sticky, and it's something that they would rather have happen rather not. So tell us about this interview.
Well, something happened when Rachel was in Chestnut Ridge, the psychiatric hospital. It seemed like whatever therapy she received there, she left a different person than she went in, and perhaps that was because she was away from Sheila for 5 days. But when she came out and entered the interrogation room, if you will, the conference room at her attorney's office, maybe it was a state police office, I can't remember for sure, but anyway, wherever she was located and the attorneys were there and the state police were there, she basically said, this is what happened. And what she told them left them dumbfounded. They told me during an interview that they practically fell off their chairs. Gaskins dropped his pencil because all along the police believed that the girls were afraid to talk because they knew something had happened to Skylar, but they were not directly involved in it. And at that moment, when Rachel revealed that they had deliberately taken her out and stabbed her, they knew that they just couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was pretty traumatic all the way around.
Yeah, it's interesting. They still were hoodwinked, and through the lawyers had said that there would be an immunity deal in case that they were just involved in some way. So they thought they were still lying. They knew they were lying, but they didn't realize the extent. And so this immunity deal, they still believe that she wasn't involved. That's why there was an immunity deal. So tell us why. Again, everyone wants to know why, and that's the central question here. Why? What was the motive, according to Rachel, for this murder?
Rachel said they killed her because they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. But that is just such a thin excuse that no one believes it. And
okay, now go ahead. Sorry.
Well, do you want the real reason?
Well, I don't want to hold you back. So, okay, sure. Give us the reason why you believe, or what you found to be the real reason.
Well, nobody acts with a motive to kill somebody unless they've had something else going on behind the scenes, psychosis or something to, you're suddenly hit with all kinds of pressure and you snap. They've got the show on Snapped where that happens. But in this case, it really does appear that these two teenage girls were afraid that their relationship would become known. Now, that is, to me, a key element in this case. However, there's also the factor that Skylar was the killjoy. Skylar was the girl who would chastise Sheila if Sheila went over the edge. Skylar was the one who told them, we really shouldn't do this. Or she would be bluntly, sharing with friends and other people, family members, that, they had smoked weed. And, those types of things were not things that Sheila and Rachel really were too keen on talking about. So there were different factors, but the primary one seems to be that they thought this relationship they had would be exposed.
Now, in this legal wrangling, and that's another really fascinating part of this book, because as soon as you think this story is, I understand it, well, then there's these legal twists and turns. Very interesting behavior. So the deal about the immunity, that's off the table when they realize that, wait a minute, she's a co-killer here. But at the same time, because she's come forward first and gives the information first, we all know this from Law and Order, that there is some sort of deal put on the table. Tell us what kind of deal for her testimony, for her being truthful and coming forward first, is given to Rachel.
The deal was that she would get 20 to 40 years, and I'm trying to think if there was something else. Parole, I believe.
Possibility to parole after 15 years?
Yes, 10 years.
And 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
And the other part of this story is too that they automatically take people that are under 18 years or 16 years of age and put them to adult court and adult sentences. But in this case, they did, didn't they?
Right. And in the state of West Virginia, you're automatically tried as an adult for a capital crime like murder. That happens when you're a certain age, and they were of the age that they were tried as adults. So that would make it mandatory that they would end up in an adult facility when they turned 18.
The other part of it, too, is what is the benefit, or I would say, what did Rachel say to her benefit in terms of her involvement in this murder that would benefit her rather than Sheila?
Okay, can you ask that again? I'm not quite sure I followed you.
Was there anything in Rachel's confession that would benefit Rachel and to the detriment of Sheila in this plea agreement and this confession?
Well, just by virtue of the fact that she was the one to take them to Skylar's body and tell what had happened, that gives her an automatic advantage, which is
Right.
typical of what happens when there's more than one killer.
But she didn't put any emphasis on one being a ringleader. Again, it's not going to benefit her really in the end, but you see often someone trying to put more responsibility on the other killer, we'll say.
She didn't seem to do that. That's not the way Corporal Gaskins outlined her confession, and that doesn't sound like what she said when she was in the courtroom and apologizing. What she said in the courtroom was interesting. She said, that wasn't me, that the girl that did that wasn't me. But she did not say that she was enticed to do it, that she was led along, that somebody coerced her, and it doesn't seem like that's what she said in the confession either.
What was the actual crime, murder itself? What did they do? There was multiple stabs. So tell us about the actual crime. Again, she is beheaded. So tell us about that. Tell us about the entire ghastly crime.
Well, they drove out to a rural area behind Blacksville. It's called Brave. It was just over the line in PA and Pennsylvania, and they got out of the car under the pretense of going to smoke marijuana at a location where they had smoked marijuana before, and they sent Skylar back to the car to get a lighter because theirs wasn't working. And when she turned her back, they reached under their hoodies to where they had the knives under their arms and started attacking her, stabbing her in the back, essentially. And she fought back. She ran a ways. At one point, she was able to get Rachel's knife from her and stabbed Rachel in the leg, and then she was overcome by the two of them. Skylar was very strong. Rachel was also very strong. The common belief is that Sheila would never have been able to carry out this crime on her own, and so there had to be two to take her down.
When she was recounting the murder itself and everything that followed the murder, the post-murder, what was her demeanor like? How did she react?
She seemed really nervous, Gaskins told me in the interview, and he said she even asked if she could have a garbage can because she thought she might throw up. Interestingly, though, she also said that she told them that Skylar had stabbed her, and they couldn't believe that, and she said, "Here, I'll show you," and she showed them the scar on her leg.
Now, what was Sheila's demeanor, and what was Sheila's behavior, and how did Sheila react to all of this?
It's been very bizarre. The courtroom scene of her still is very disquieting. She looks like she doesn't know what's going on around her, very like a child who just doesn't even get it. And from what I've heard from people who have talked to her since she's been in prison and the letters I read, she seems like this is no big deal. She doesn't indicate that she did anything wrong, and she seems to think that she's going to get out in no time, and when she gets out, she'll go back to smoking weed and hanging out in vehicles and, getting high.
What was the attendance like at the court case itself in terms of parents of Rachel, Sheila, Skylar, and friends? Tell us a little bit of that sort of attendance, dynamic, and the event.
Well, it was very, very tense. There was, on the right side, if you're facing the judge's bench, you would have Skylar's family, friends, and on the left side of the aisle, you would have Rachel's family or Sheila's, depending on which hearing it was for their sentencing. And, of course, you've got, I think it was probably the teenagers who were torn because the teenagers some of them were friends of all three girls and maybe didn't really even know where to sit, but you could clearly see the pain and the suffering that all of the family members were experiencing. It was very hard to watch.
Now, if I'm not wrong, Mary and David, along with a politician, government official, a commissionaire, I believe, put
that would be
some,
Tom Bloom.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Thank you. And just did something that really, despite all this tragedy, there is some little bright spot with the law change. So tell us about the fight for the law and what happened just around the same time, if it's not previous,
Sure.
about Skylar's law.
Well, Chuck Yoakum and Tom Bloom. Chuck had been a student, and he's in an administration position over in Annapolis schools now. But he and Tom got together, and they, along with Charlene Marshall, a delegate from Mon County, came up with Skylar's Law so that in the future, whenever there's a missing child or teen, no matter the circumstances, the Amber Alert should automatically be put out to the public so that there's no time lapse, because, of course, the first 24 hours are crucial when you're searching for a missing child. And so that was the one good thing that came of all this.
And what was the sentence for Sheila in the end? What was her sentence?
She got a life sentence with a chance of parole in 15 years.
And it's because they were young that by law they're able to have some possibility of parole. Otherwise it would be deemed cruel and unusual punishment, right?
That seems to be the common thinking, although it seems like there is some amount of not really argument but discussion about whether that's an accurate assessment of the way that law reads. I've read some literature since then that indicates that there are some cases where they do sentence teens and don't give them parole, but it's an interesting legal dilemma that's currently being batted around in the court system.
Just a side note, in Canada, if this were to happen, both of those girls would be given the maximum sentence in juvenile custody, which would have been 3 years. I believe
You're
that
kidding.
they would have almost... No, that's as long as they could hold them. I don't believe they could raise them to adult court. I do not believe, even with the conservative government being in power for about 6 years or more, that they could not do that. 3 years they would be released. That's the difference.
Wow, that's incredible. And people here, especially in the state of West Virginia, but a lot of people from around the country who have followed the case are outraged that they even got parole. They think that, they should be held indefinitely. Yeah, the possibility of parole.
We are into election cycle next year, and the reigning conservative government, they say it's just a political move, but they are trying to introduce legislature that is opposed by the opposition parties for the removal of the possibility of parole for the most heinous killers and criminals. That's what they're just putting forth now in 2015. So there is no actual life sentence, and there's first-degree murder. It would be life sentence, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years. So just some differences I thought I'd throw in there, because I just find it fascinating that the difference is so... the same judicial system, I know there can be differences. There's differences in other countries other than America, too, but this is a stark difference when I'm looking at this, day to day in doing this true murder. So
very.
Tell us about Mary and Dave and sort of where they were at the end of this, having achieved Skylar's Law, but have just put through the ringer with this entire ordeal. I know that you got really inside this community and got inside these people's lives to tell this story, this incredible story. So tell us about Mary and Dave after all of this.
Well, Skylar was their only child.
Right.
Not their only daughter. She was their only child. So, of course, their lives were pretty much destroyed when she disappeared, and especially when they found out she had been murdered, and how terrible her suffering had to have been during that murder. But they have had a hard time with it, as you can imagine. I don't think any parent, unless they've experienced that extent, the grief of that extent, that they could even imagine. But they've tried to speak out at different groups and churches and schools when they're invited, and try to help the community to maybe appreciate what to look for in terms of other teens or children, what to watch for. They've just been, trying to get through it all, and it's taken so long, and now there's a civil suit that's involved, and it's just going to take a lot of time for them to heal. I don't know that that they'll ever be completely successful, but they are doing better, and I think that part of the heart-wrenching pain that they experienced had to do with Sheila pretending to help them search for Skylar and pretending to not know what had happened to her, and then feeling like they had been betrayed by Sheila, because they literally took up for Sheila when people in public media started bashing her and saying, awful things about her. They would take up for Sheila originally.
Yeah, I regret that we didn't talk about that too, because that was a dramatic, profound and very psychopathic moment when Sheila's very adamant and involved in the search for her friend, and very, very emotional, and did some fine acting around that time. So again, just I can imagine the betrayal that the family felt, on top of the grief and on top of the just inexplicable horror of social media and criticism and the police inaction, so they thought, or at least they couldn't get any information, and they thought their daughter was missing but likely killed, and didn't know where the perpetrator was at all. And you captured all this in this book, so I want to congratulate you on Pretty Little Killers capturing this murder and mayhem and horror, and really a fine book. So I want to thank you very much. For those that might want to contact you, I don't know if you have a Facebook page or you communicate that way, or how can people learn a little bit more about this or other work that you do? How can they connect with you?
Facebook, Twitter, and I also have a website, and it's the title of my memoir. My first book is sisterofsilence.com.
Okay, I want to thank you very much, Daleen, taking out your valuable time to come on to the program. I'm sorry about all the technical nonsense at the beginning. I'm glad we got to have you on here and fully explain this book. So thank you very much for this interview, and
thank you, Dan.
And I hope to talk to you again soon, and have yourself a great evening.
Great. You too. Bye-bye.
Good night.